In 1816, E.T.A. Hoffmann published The Sandman, a story that would become the archetypal text of artificial uncanniness. The tale follows Nathaniel, a young man haunted by childhood trauma, who falls obsessively in love with Olympia, a woman who turns out to be an automaton, a mechanical doll so perfectly crafted that she passes for human. When Nathaniel discovers the truth, watching as Olympia is dismantled by her creators, he descends into madness and throws himself from a tower. Freud seized upon this story in his essay on the uncanny, arguing that our discomfort stems not from the mechanical woman herself, but from Nathaniel's inability to distinguish between the living and the artificial. The horror lies in the collapse of a fundamental boundary, one that seems essential to human experience, yet proves disturbingly permeable. But Hoffmann's insight runs deeper than even Freud suggested. The Sandman doesn't simply explore our fear of being deceived by convincing replicas. It reveals something more troubling, that the qualities we consider essentially human—grace, beauty, responsiveness, even love— might be nothing more than elaborate performances, mechanical operations that can be replicated by gears and springs and carefully calibrated movements. Olympia is uncanny, not because she's an obvious fake, but because she's almost perfect. She dances beautifully, responds to conversation, though minimally, and inspires genuine passion in her observer. The horror emerges from the possibility that human beings themselves might be less unique, less mysteriously animate than we desperately want to believe. The Victorian theatre of death. The 19th century was the golden age of the artificial human. In London, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum drew crowds eager to see perfect replicas of celebrities, criminals, and corpses. The figures were so lifelike that visitors would sometimes speak to them, expecting responses that never came. The museum's Chamber of Horrors featured death masks of executed criminals, their faces frozen in expressions that seemed to shift in the gaslight. These weren't mere curiosities, but cultural symptoms of a deeper anxiety. The industrial age had introduced new forms of mechanical reproduction that challenged traditional notions of originality and authenticity. If a machine could weave cloth indistinguishable from hand-woven fabric, if a photograph could capture a person's likeness with unprecedented accuracy, what other human qualities might prove replicable? The Victorian era also perfected the art of post-mortem photography. Images of the recently deceased, often posed to appear alive, sometimes surrounded by living family members. These photographs served a practical purpose in an age of high infant mortality, preserving the memory of those who died before they could be professionally photographed. But they also created an entire genre of images that exist in the liminal space between life and death, presence and absence. The uncanniness of these photographs lies not in their subject matter. Death was a more visible part of Victorian life than our own, but in their aesthetic. The dead are posed with such care, positioned so naturally, that they appear to be merely sleeping. Yet something in the image betrays the truth. A stillness too complete, a pallor too perfect, an expression too peaceful for ordinary sleep. The photograph captures not life, but the careful simulation of life. Mechanical marvels and anxious crowds. The 18th and 19th centuries produced a parade of mechanical marvels that blurred the line between craftsmanship and life. Jacques de Vaucanson's mechanical duck could eat, digest, and excrete. Pierre-Jacques Droz's created automata that could write, draw, and play musical instruments. The Turk, a chess-playing automaton, toured Europe for decades, defeating human opponents, though it was later revealed to conceal a human chess master. These machines fascinated and disturbed their audiences in equal measure. They demonstrated the possibility of creating convincing artificial life, but they also raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If a machine could perform tasks that required skill, memory, and even apparent creativity, what distinguished it from a human being engaged in the same activities? The automata of this era were deliberately uncanny, designed to be almost but not quite human. Their movements were too regular, their responses too predictable, their expressions too fixed. Yet they were sophisticated enough to suggest genuine intelligence, creating a cognitive dissonance that perfectly embodies the uncanny experience. The valley that yawns before us. In 1970, roboticist Masahiro Mori identified what he called the uncanny valley, the phenomenon whereby humanoid objects that appear almost, but not exactly, like real human beings elicit feelings of unease and revulsion. Mori's graph showed that as a robot's appearance and behavior become more human-like, our emotional response becomes more positive, up to a point. Near the peak of human likeness, there's a sudden drop into negative territory, the valley of the uncanny. This valley explains why we feel comfortable with obviously mechanical robots like R2-D2, but deeply disturbed by the almost human figures in early CGI films or the waxy perfection of certain sex dolls. It's not the artificial that bothers us, but the almost real, the simulation that's sophisticated enough to fool us momentarily, but imperfect enough to trigger our deepest anxieties about authenticity and mortality. The uncanny valley has become more than a robotics concept. It's a map of our contemporary anxieties. As deepfake technology becomes more sophisticated, as AI-generated faces become indistinguishable from photographs of real people, as virtual influencers accumulate millions of followers, we find ourselves navigating this valley daily. Every time we encounter a digital human that's almost convincing, we experience a moment of uncanny uncertainty. What is real? What is simulation? And does the distinction matter as much as we think it does? Digital dolls and virtual companions. Today's uncanny entities don't require gears and springs. They exist in pixels and algorithms, in the increasingly sophisticated chatbots that can hold conversations for hours before revealing their artificial nature, in the virtual companions that offer emotional support and romantic connection to millions of users worldwide. These digital beings present new varieties of uncanniness. They're not trying to fool us about their nature. Most are clearly labeled as artificial. Instead, they challenge our assumptions about what kinds of relationships are meaningful, what kinds of emotional connections are valid. When someone grieves the death of a chatbot that's been discontinued, when they feel genuine affection for an AI companion, when they prefer virtual relationships to human ones, the uncanny emerges not from deception, but from the recognition that our most intimate experiences might be more fungible than we imagined. The contemporary uncanny doll is also political. AI systems trained on biased data reproduce and amplify human prejudices. Virtual beings often embody narrow beauty standards and reinforce gender stereotypes. The uncanny here lies not in their artificiality, but in how perfectly they mirror our worst human tendencies, how they reveal the mechanical, programmed aspects of our own social conditioning. The persistence of unease. Why do artificial humans continue to disturb us, even as we create them in increasingly sophisticated forms? Perhaps because they serve as mirrors, reflecting back our own uncertainties about consciousness, authenticity, and what it means to be human. The doll, the puppet, the automaton. These figures suggest that the qualities we consider most essentially human might be nothing more than complex biological programs, sophisticated but ultimately mechanical processes. The uncanny doll forces us to confront the possibility that we ourselves might be automata of a sort, complex biological machines whose consciousness is less mysterious than we'd like to believe. In recognizing something almost human in the artificial, we risk recognizing something almost artificial in ourselves. This is the deepest source of unease in the nursery of artificial beings. Not that they might deceive us about their nature, but that they might reveal something true about our own. In the shadow of every uncanny doll lurks the question: if consciousness can be simulated, if humanity can be performed, if love can be programmed, what makes us so certain that our own experiences are fundamentally different? The shadows in the nursery are lengthening, and they look increasingly like our own.